Bungalow Bill here. Now, I was working on the main gun for a new hover tank, more along the lines of a main battle tank hover tank, so something that would have more defenses and more staying power than the Drunken Duck, when I decided that I want to take a look at the railguns inside the Kobold to see, okay, so how are these built? Is there any secret sauce in them? And, well, spoiler alert, there isn't, but there was something else interesting that I did find. And you may notice that this Kobold is spawned on my side, and it is in my fleet colors. Now, the thing that I noticed that I found interesting was that there are actually two different ammo controllers on the Kobold. Now, you might notice that in this particular Kobold, the second one is selected. The Kobold should be hollow point. This is the default round for the Kobold. A lot of gunpowder, small round, hollow point, with 45 thump armor pierce, which is quite high for thump rounds. Thump rounds do not need to bypass armor stacking bonuses, although they're less significant than they used to be anyway. Instead, I've switched to this other shell, which I don't know if it wasn't used for the Kobold, either because it might be too effective against some player craft, or simply because in a lot of cases, thump is better. Although to some extent, you can see the downside of the hollow point head in my fight against the Kobold in the playthrough, because I had the fairly small craft, what was I using? The lungfish, which took a lot of rounds from a Kobold, because it had to destroy basically every block on the craft, or, a little more than 40% of them to actually kill it, while the rest of my fleet chipped away at the Kobold and eventually killed it. However, this round is a much, much longer round. Now, originally when I discovered this, the rail draw for stats, if memory serves, was 37,084. I re-Tetrised the gun, the APS gun, without actually changing the space that it was blocked into, and 29,000 is the most rail draw that I could fit without just not damping all the recoil. So I dialed the rail draw down to 29,000, and this gets to 72 expected armor pierce, which is stacked heavy armor, as well as 25,000 expected kinetic damage, which is quite a lot. This shell, unlike the other one, has an emergency ejection defuse. This might not have actually been allowed. I don't know. Because something that's iconic about the Kobold is that it has these ammo ejectors right on the bottom, and a lot of Grey Talon crafts, I shouldn't say a lot, but some Grey Talon crafts do this. And there's a fairly thin layer on the bottom here of armor. So when you start rupturing these autoloaders, it'll spew shells at the bottom. It looks really cool. It would be more effective if it had more armor here and defuses, but I think the shell ejection is really an iconic part of the Kobold. And it may have been a requirement. I don't actually know. I wasn't a part of the refit. So I'll take a quick tour of the craft, what I did, how you kill the Kobold, and then how would this be different? Because this is what the Kobold could have been. You could have had to fight this instead. So, if you haven't seen the Kobold before, it's a giant flying brick. At the front, a lot of heavy armor wedges. I did notice that in front of some of the shield projectors, there are beams instead of wedges. I don't know if this is intentional or not. And then behind the wedges, a lot more heavy armor. Interestingly, in the section in the middle, there's a bunch without wedges, and the wedges are behind with just a little bit of heavy armor behind them. I think some craft from factions like the Scarlet Dawn have stacks of wedges. So once you get through one set of wedges, you have another one. Now, this is part of the reason why the Kobold may use a hollow point shell. Getting through these is brutal for armor piercing rounds. Thumb rounds do not care about angled armor, so regardless of how they hit this, they'll treat it just the same. For these AP rounds, it is quite hard to get through it, and then behind it is basically a big gun. The Tetris is nothing amazing. It's very, very lazy, but it's easy to do, and it's not that much more inefficient than 3-clip Tetris, which, when I'm making gunpowder autoloader or gunpowder guns in turrets, so I'm not using any rail at all, I usually use 3-clip Tetris for most turret sizes because I can pack things tighter. If I do 4-clip Tetris, I usually wind up with dead space in the turret. For railguns, I usually use 4-clip Tetris, but the efficiency gains are not that large. Now, what did I do? So, basically, I needed more rail draw. The rate of fire is slowed down fairly considerably, so I had to switch cooling, and there's less gunpowder in the shell, that's why the rate of fire is slowed down. There are more non-gunpowder components, and gunpowder components cost less, or gunpowder casings cost less and reload faster than actual payload components. And to get the rail draw, I needed to replace those with additional railgun chargers and additional recoil absorbers. I also noticed there's a little bit of dead space in the gun. Not a lot, but a little bit. I removed that to pack it with additional things. There are also a small number of 6-way connectors. Those are all gone and replaced with functional components. So, that out of the way, if you want to kill the Kobold like I did, if you look more towards the flank, there is not a lot of protection here. The bottom, I mean, even less, but it's a little bit harder to hit the craft on the bottom. And on the top, not a whole lot either. So, my preferred manner if I'm fighting one-on-one in a front-sider battle is to use vertically launched missiles that come down at the enemy craft and just tear through the top. The Scarlet Dawn and Grey Talon front-siders all have this weakness that if they take heat missiles to the top, they just instantly die. Which is why my giant capital ship, the Sekhmet, is equipped with them. Also, this may be, I don't know if it's a block count thing or a laziness thing, but monolithic steam engines, so if you can damage them, she'll lose energy generation. For some reason that I don't understand, there are 2 cranks. This does do a few things. It will armor the AI a little bit better, because the AI is in here. Although she does have a lot of surge protectors, this AI looks very vulnerable to EMP to me. But, so in the raw, where I have large steam engines as well, I share the crankshaft between opposed pistons for a boxer engine. It just makes a more efficient steam engine, fewer components, less cost, that sort of thing. But you are more vulnerable to the crank getting deleted. However, in a craft like the Kobold, with the AI sandwiched between the cranks, if you lose a crank, you're dead. So, I don't know. It would have to find somewhere else to put the AI, though. Anyway, enough talking. Oh, actually, there's one more thing I want to mention. I am personally not a fan of the extra compressors, or really any of the extra add-ons. As far as I'm aware, they're not better than just more jet components, and they make the jet a weird shape, so it's hard to use space. There's actually a fair bit of wasted space in the Kobolds because of these. It's not huge, but it does exist, and I don't really know why you'd use them. You can see that this is actually less volume efficient than a combustor. It says functions as 0.1 combustor, but this is 1/9 the volume of a combustor for 1/10 the effect, so not great. Anyway, in terms of a macro scale, what's the actual difference between this retrofitted Kobold, or re-retrofitted Kobold if you want to look at it that way, in the original? Well, it costs 50,000 more and 130 more firepower, give or take. Part of the increase in the firepower is that the firepower calculations just don't like hollow point heads very much. The other part is that the guns got more expensive. This looks really weird to me. I didn't notice that before. Those are some weird smokestacks. Anyway, let's shoot at something that really demonstrates the potential power of these rounds compared to the old Kobold. Or rather, the Kobold that's in the campaign. And then let's shoot at the Kobold that's in the campaign. Although I'm going to turn my repair tentacles off before doing that. So let's choose one of my favorite punching bags. She's effective, but not that effective, and that's the tier. And the reason I'm choosing the tier is that... Oh, there's one more thing I changed that I should talk about. The Kobold's guns are supposed to be synchronized to have a stagger between them. Since I changed the rate of fire, I just deleted the synchronization instead of recalculating it. So let's see what we do to the tier. Actually, I'm going to keep the HUD up so that we can see damage numbers. Now, one of the things that we're going to notice is that these rounds are not that reliable. Depending on where we hit, we are going to overpen. But as you can see, we've already hit explosive components on the inside. We've dealt about 60,000 explosive damage. We've already knocked out one of the turrets. So this is sort of... The tier is sort of the best case scenario for craft that you can shoot with railguns, I feel like. The broadside armor has absolutely no defense against railguns. Yeah, something's a little screwy with this lock-on follow camera, but looks like it's working right now. So, really, really bad time for the tier. It doesn't actually break her apart that fast. It's pretty comparable with the campaign version of the Kobold for how fast it actually deconstructs the tier, maybe even a little bit slower. But it just knocks the firepower out very fast. A lot of craft are not tolerant to having holes poked in them, and I think this would be pretty savage for most player designs, that they wouldn't have the mitigation against kinetic, these armor-piercing rounds that some of the godly frontsiders do. And most of my craft don't have them either, because unless you're making a frontsider, you just don't have space for wedge armor. It makes broadsiders too fat. I mean, you can do it, but it'll look really ugly. So anyway, at this point, it's really just waiting for the tier to despawn. It's basically dead. It's just a question of how long it takes to actually do the extra damage. Now, something that would make the Kobold much more effective here is that if she flew a little bit higher, and then I could have her target blocks underwater. Currently, her projectiles will almost always skip, so I can't have her target blocks below water. But if she flew a little higher and shot down at a slightly sharper angle, her projectiles wouldn't skip, and I could target blocks below water, and she would shred the tier way faster. Anyway, let's get rid of the tier. You probably also may have noticed, if you're paying attention to the Kobold in that fight, that the Kobold actually has powerful anti-missile systems, LAMs, and anti-missile missiles. That didn't actually repair. There's also this strange diff gun that is actually CWIS. I don't actually know if these are also diff. I do know that she has something like 2 APS firepower when the main guns aren't working. Alright, repair tentacle is disabled. Stop feeding materials. And let's spawn in the normal Kobold. I don't really understand the distinguishing factor between airships and thruster craft, because the Kobold is a thruster craft. Now, the first thing to notice is that, well, there is going to be a fair bit of RNG in this fight. The other Kobold both fires faster and appears to fire way faster because it staggers fire. But the Kobold has some nasty shields for this sort of fight. The Kobold also tries to be higher than the Kobold, so they're both just going to race to the flight ceiling, at which point they'll sit there. The campaign Kobolds, in every task that I've done for this, will start way, way ahead, because these AP rounds take a while to break through the wedges, but actually we're already seeing shells eject. It's even, but this Kobold's speed has slowed way down on the guns. And she's actually already down to 300 firepower, whereas the modified Kobold is still at 633, or her maximum firepower. That means that despite how good the defenses for armor-piercing rounds are on the campaign version of the Kobold, just having that one shell get in there was just so devastating. I think it was a little bit of a lucky hit, because I think it went down the gun barrel for the APS gun. But even if you don't get a lucky hit and just hit straight wedges all the time, I've never seen the campaign Kobold win. And it's usually pretty convincing. I think the campaign Kobold is going down pretty soon. Some of these components are way back in there. Like, we're seeing steam components falling out, and we've seen from our walkthrough that those are way in the butt. And at this point, the modified Kobold has taken a significant advantage. You can also see, because of the shield geometry, sometimes bounces get captured, where they hit the shield and then bounce into the pontoon. I also see multiple bounces on shields, which I didn't think was supposed to be a thing. There's a big pen. We'll check our firepower. We've lost a little bit. I suspect it's one of the diff guns. Maybe even both of the diff guns. Down to 100 firepower on the campaign Kobold. I think I saw a pretty good hit there. Didn't lose a lot of stuff. I just see a few APS components. That one looks like it went right through. Might not have gotten as deep as it could have, but a lot of recoil absorbers falling out there. Sometimes this fight ends very early. It can be quite volatile. The reason is that sometimes the shot just goes straight down the middle, takes out a big line of jets, and then the Kobold just falls. Which I thought she was already doing. Whereas the campaign Kobold's stripping off armor with Thump is so reliable. That went into the ammo compartment, or the AI compartment, and she's AI dead. So you can see that the damage returned was real. We've lost some barrel components. It looks like this hasn't gone all the way back to the rail components. But I don't think that there's any real firepower loss. The firepower numbers are slightly different, and I think it's because this cooling limit, despite matching the autoloader limit exactly, I think that there's a little bit of rounding error there that's causing it to not quite match. Whereas this one, where the cooling limit is slightly higher than the autoloader limit, I think fires slightly faster. Well, anyway, this was I guess just something that I found a little bit interesting when I was digging through the Kobold, which I can't say exactly why this version of the Kobold isn't the one in the campaign from, I suppose, only the people who did the refits and the keepers of the lore who verify the refits could really speak to that. I probably saw something about it at one point in the Discord when the Kobold was being refit, but I don't keep a very close eye on the faction discussion threads, although I do read almost everything that's posted on the Discord. And when I look at my faction colors on the Kobold, the fact that I think it looks really bad sort of makes me want to redo my faction colors. At the very least, once I get a little bit more practice with aesthetics on craft, I may I'll probably cut out either the black or the white. I don't know. But make it a little bit more subtle. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed watching, and I hope to see you in the future.